Hello and welcome. This is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and in this week we have part 10, the final part of the Data Import Manager. We're going to be covering reoccurring imports and how to run those imports. We're also going to be covering a great feature called the DateAdd. We are going to be adding in an import log so we can track all of our imports, and we're going to be using the task scheduler so that we can automate the tasks and automate the imports completely hands-free. It's going to be a great training. I can't wait. Let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining us. We've covered so much in this 10-part series. This is the final part 10. We've covered so much from the data source, the destination, mapping your data formats, creating your import and summary, adding templates, saving templates and clearing them. We have also added temporary data and how we bring that over into dynamic sources and static sources. And in this week, we're going to continue our additional by having recurring imports. In last week, we covered how to save and we covered how to run this amazing fade out switch. We've got a lot more to cover this week, including how to run those recurring using advanced filters. And we're also going to be creating the import log, which I just mentioned, and of course the task schedule. We've got a really lot to cover in this final episode, so I really appreciate you sticking with me on all 10 episodes of this amazing data import manager, almost 10 hours of training on just this one series. So it's been a fantastic series. All right, let's get started with the training. But just before I do, I want to remind you that I create these free trainings each and every Tuesday. So please do subscribe. And if you have not yet, go ahead and click that notification icon bell. That'll make sure that you get a notification when I create new trainings, because we get so busy. Often we forget it's Tuesday, so do click that notification bell. All right, and a few products. Just to remind you, I've got the upcoming mentorship program. I know I've been talking about that a lot. It's because I'm creating these training videos each and every week. I'm also doing the mentorship program, so it is a lot of work, but I'm working very hard and should have it launched soon. I've been selling a whole lot of the 100 workbooks, so that price might go up soon, but go ahead and grab that now. It's just $37, but if you click the link below and the price has already gone up, then you missed the special. So keep that in mind. That's 100 workbooks for just $37. Okay, let's get to it. The first thing I want to do is I want to continue where we left off before. So we're going to jump right into the Developers tab, Visual Basic. We're going to cover this time the last part of the reoccurring check. This is going to actually run those reoccurring. Last week we covered switch, that really cool switch on how to switch and turn on and off with the fade out and the fade. We also covered how to save these recurring, and in that case what we were doing is we were saving all of this information, whether it's active or inactive. We were saving all that information into this table here, the recurring imports. In today's training, the first part of it, we're going to cover how we take these recurring and how we determine what to run and when to run it. So we're going to use an advanced filter, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to take all the data in this reoccurring imports and we're going to run it through an advanced filter with just two specific criteria. That criteria is, one, we want our recurring to be active. If the user makes it inactive, of course we don't want that. And we also want it less than or equal the current date and the current time. Right now, as of recording this, it is September 4th, 4:47 p.m. Hopefully I'll get this done before dinner. So we're going to get this current time, and I'm using the text, the now function. Keep in mind this, depending upon your configuration, you may want to remove all of this formatting. I did this for you. It works just fine on my system. If you have any issues with this, if it's not returning any data here, but it should be, clear out the formatting and just put now. Just use now. That'll just provide you a number, and that should be sufficient, because this data, it may not work in certain formats, but now will work just fine. So you may not need the formats. I've got it formatted all nice and pretty here so you can see it, but you may not need it or require it, or it may cause issues. It depends on your configuration, your current system time and configuration based on your country codes and things like that. So keep that in mind. So the idea is anything less than where the next run is. In fact, we're going to use this scheduled for. This scheduled for, if you remember last week, all we're doing is combining the next run on and the next time. I like to keep these things separate so the user can change them separately. Here, I want to keep them separate so that if we put in 9/3, yesterday's date, at 10 a.m., I like to keep these separate when the user's entering the information, but really to use it, we want to keep these together. So I just changed this here, and you'll notice the change. But when I'm running the import, I really like to have them together, a date and time, because I want to know anything that's scheduled not just before this date, but before this time. Maybe it's currently, like for example, now this is 1 day before, but even if this was 9/4, right now it's 10 a.m. So here it's 9/4, but it's 4:49 p.m. So it's 10 a.m. So in this case, 10 a.m. is earlier. So this would also, as long as it's active, would show up in our results in our advanced filter. So we're going to run all this data, the two criteria. It has to be active, and the scheduled for, this information right here, has to be actually less than the value. Remember, dates in Excel are basically simply just numbers or decimals or both. The combination, the times are decimals while the dates are whole numbers. So if we were to turn this into just a time, you would see it's just in a decimal here. And let's format this as a number and we'll see what it looks like. It's just the whole number in the decimals. So the 43712 is the date, September 4th, and the 41667 is 10 a.m. So that's how Excel actually sees dates and times. So we've covered that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run the advanced filter, and then what I'm going to do is this. Whatever results, if there's any results on our advanced filter, I want to run an import based on the settings here. Then what I'm going to do is once the imports run, I'm going to take the last run, I'm going to update this last run with the current date and time. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the next run. I'm going to add, so if it's 5 days, right, whatever the current date is or less, I'm going to add 5, in this case 5 days onto that for the next run. So let's run that import, and as long as it's before, which it will work, so we'll just click, we can click this button, if we right click this button, I've assigned a macro to that. And the macro that I've assigned is called reoccurring check. That's the macro that we're going to go over, but I want you to see exactly how it functions. So we'll click reoccurring. It's going to run that template right there. And then if we take a look at reoccurring imports, we will see that the last run just updated here, September 4th, 4:51 p.m. And the next run has now been updated to 5 days after. And if we were to change these parameters, of course, this would update as well. And you'll see the results that got returned were right here. And now if we try to run it again, it's not going to run. Nothing's going to happen. If I click this button again, nothing's going to happen. No scheduled imports found. You'll see the results here. So nothing happened because there were no specific scheduled for that are less than or equal to the current date and time. That's why. So there was no filters. Okay, so you understand how that's going to work, but let's go into VBA and walk you step by step exactly how we did this. In this kind of recurring automation, it can be used for anything like automated emails or anything. So I really want you to pay attention to this frequency and the duration, because imports is just a fraction of what you can use this kind of power for. Anything that's scheduled, any kind of time schedule, you can use this feature as long as you have the frequency and duration, a last run, a next run, and you combine. So this same type of feature can be used really in anything. We've used it in the past for some emails, but you could really use it for communication. You could use it for, in fact, when we develop our accounting application in the mentorship program, we're going to use that for have recurring transactions, so that transactions get created automatically hands-free, even while you're not at the computer. So we're going to show you that in the mentorship program, so that'll be coming up soon. So the idea is to bring whatever data and bring it over. So let's go into the VBA and take a look at that. Now that you understand exactly what we're trying to achieve and the result that we're trying to achieve, I can walk you step by step through the VBA. We do have to define a lot of variables here. So we want the last recurring row. We're going to run an advanced filter. So I need to know the last row of all the recurring imports. In this case, it's 5, but we're going to run an advanced filter. So we're going to use and XLF to get the last row. So that's obviously important. The last results row, when results get returned, we need to know the last row. And then we're going to go step by step through the results. In case there's multiple results, we need to go step by step through the results. So to go from result to result, we need to keep track of the row that we're on. And the reoccurring row, I also need to know what is the reoccurring row. I want to define that. The reoccurring frequency, I want to know what is the frequency, and we need to know the date interval. So the date interval and frequency are both important, and that is the information that is right here. So we have the frequency and the duration. We need that information into variables because we are going to bring that in so that we can update the next date accordingly. The scheduled date is the current date in which it's scheduled, and then the next date, so those are dimensioned as dates. Focus primarily on sheet 6. That is the reoccurring imports. That's the one we're going to be running our advanced filter on, and we're going to be primarily focused on sheet 6. So that's the first thing. And as you know, whenever we run an advanced filter, we always want to clear the results of any previous filter. So from R4 to AM99, we're going to clear out any previous results that came. In this case, it would be R4 here all the way to AB. I guess it's AB and down. So we want to clear all of that out. Let's change that to AB, although it doesn't make a difference. So we want to clear out any results. Next up, we want to know the last reoccurring row. That's the last row using column A, because A is our reoccurring number. It's always going to contain a value. That's going to get us our last row. Remember, we need to define the last row because we need to know the last. In this case, it's 5. So we use end XL up to get that. And then just going to check, just in case there is no data, we cannot run an advanced filter if there is actually no reoccurring. So if that last reoccurring row is less than 4, it's going to skip all of this and go down to no data. There's nothing else, and then we're going to get a no scheduled imports found or something like that. So I'm going to put that in E47 so the user can see that. Okay, so it's going to go to no data. But of course, assuming that the row is 4 or greater, we can move on. We're ready to run our advanced filter. We don't need, often what we'll do is we'll put in criteria, but this criteria is fixed. It never changes. When we run advanced filter, sometimes, like for the example, for the data mapping, we're putting in a criteria here. We're putting in the template 2. This changes. Sometimes it's template 1, 2, or whatever. So in this case, the criteria changes. However, in our recurring imports, we have a fixed criteria. It's always going to be less than or equal to the current date and time. It's always going to be active. So there's nothing to put in the criteria that's fixed. In fact, let me color that. Usually I like things in color when they're fixed and white when they're not. So that's fixed, and it doesn't change. Okay, so there's no criteria to put in. So continuing on with our advanced filter, we're going to start out at A3 through K. That is our main table and includes the headers. We must always include the headers, so A3 all the way to K in the last row and going down. That's very important. And then all the way down to the last row. So that is the data in which we're going to be running our advanced filter. We're going to copy that. We want to copy that data to another location. We do not want to filter it in place. And then the criteria, that fixed criteria I just spoke of, that's in N3 through N3 through 04. We're going to copy the results we want in R3 to AB3 and unique true. I can make that false. Sometimes I make true or false. It should be fine. I think either way it's fine. They're rarely going to be different. I mean, they're rarely going to be the same. Okay, so now we need to check. Now we need to check if there are no results. That would mean that there's the last row would be 3. So we need to run a check. If the last row is less than 4, then go to no data because there are no results. So the first thing we're going to do is get the last row. So the last results row using column R and XLab just like we did up above, but this time it's the results. So we're going to get the last results. And if the last results row is less than 4, go to no data. Again, skipping all of this and going down here. So assuming that there is actual results, we can move on. The first thing I want to do is if we're going to be running a specific import, we need to get the let's pull that up. What I'm going to do is once the results come in here, let's just copy this over and let's just assume that we have some results in here. Okay, so let's say the results are in here and we've run it and we've got some results. The first thing I want to do is I want to take this to the template number and I want to place it right in our import. I want to put it right here because I need to load all of it. So I'm going to put it right here in N3. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to load this. I'm going to load this template so that all of our source data comes back, all of our destination data comes back, all of our mapping data comes back. And that way we're going to run the import summary. We can just run it. So we want to bring bring the template and fill all these fields, we want to load that template. So everything from this table on the import templates here is going to come all the way, all that data is going to come back into this. Once it's loaded in here, we can then run it, because we know when we run those imports, we're going to use all of our mapped data here based on the, depending upon if it's a dynamic source or a static source, and if the destination is an existing workbook or a new workbook. So we've got all these settings that we need to know to run our import. That's very important. So we need to pre-fill all these fields so that we can run our macros. So to do that, we need to get, the first thing we want to do is get the template number right in N3. So we do just that. N3 right here is equal to what? S and the results row. There are multiple rows, so we're going to run a loop. Results row equals 4 to the last row. So in this case, we're going to run a loop automatically. If we go back into the recurring, we're going to run a loop starting at 4 and going all the way down. If you have multiple imports to run, you'll want to start a loop. So the first thing I want to do is S, and whatever row we're on, in this case it's 4, take this value and bring it right into N3 right here. So to do that, that helps us load it. So then we can move on to the next step. Now we're ready to run the import because we have the right template. We have the right number there. So we can run that macro. That's going to run all of our data. That's going to run completely the imports from the source or multiple sources in case it's dynamic, and bring it into whatever destination. So we've gone over that. That was one of the, I think, episode 4 where we ran a run import, and that's going to run all of our imports. So if it's a dynamic macro, it's going to run here, and if it's a static macro, it's going to run here. Why is that? Because the run import macro will determine automatically if it's a static or if it's a dynamic. If sheet 1 value 2, once the import loads, automatically it's going to run. So it's going to run that automatically. Okay, so depending upon this value, whether it's a static or dynamic. So now we can run it. Okay, back into our macro. Let's continue on into the reoccurring. And so we'll run this import macro. And then what I want to do, then I want to reset import type to reoccurring. I want to do this, then I want to run the log. I want to input the information into the import log, this sheet import log. And we do that with just a few macros. So let's go over the import. I want to take all that information and I want to put it in here into the import log. So I want to do that, and that is sheet 4. So the first thing I want to do is run that. But actually, let's back up a little bit because I've added something in here in the run import macro that's brand new, and that is part of the log. So let's look at that. Either one of these modules will have it. So let's take a look at the static and go down here, because there's a step that I want to cover before. If we scroll all the way down here, we will see that we've added something called add to import log. Add to import log. And that right there is this macro right here, and basically that's going to add the data to the import. So the first thing what I want to do is I want to add either manual or automatic to this. Manual or reoccurring. So just to go over that, we're going to go over that next. This import log, basically all it does is going to take all this data and put it in here, so we know when the import was run, what type was it, manual or reoccurring, what is the template number, what is the template name, what is the source type, is it static or dynamic, and then what was the destination workbook, so I know, and then I want the result. What did we import? Did we import rows, to what workbook? I want to know everything that was done, because when we set this on automatic, we may not be at the computer when this thing runs, so it's always nice to have a log to see exactly what ran and when. So moving on, we're going to cover that in just a little bit, so I'm jumping ahead, but I want to get back to where we are on the reoccurring. So we're going to run this one right here, sheet 4. This is a one line. We're just updating it. We're going to reset it to import type to reoccurring, just there, because it's a reoccurring. This is a reoccurring, so we're going to set that. And then the rest of the information that goes in the import log comes in the macro that we're going to go over next. So next up, we're going to set the reoccurring row equals AB. This is the reoccurring row. Back into the reoccurring sheets. I need to update this original data. Once it's run, I need to put the last run date, and I also need to update the next run date. So I need to update these fields. But if I'm running through this list, how can I update the original data? How can I update the original data? Because if I update this here, if I change this, that's not going to help. This is going to be cleared out. But how can I update the original data? Well, I can as long as I know what row. We track the row right here. So the row, the simple formula row, gets carried over to our results. So A, B, and the results row is our row. So as long as I know the row, in this case 5, I can then update the original database because I already know that the last run, G, I know the column because it's G, and I know the row, it's 5. So G5 equals the current date and time. H5 is going to be the updated date. So I need to adjust that original data, and I can do that as long as I have the row. So getting that row in column A, B is critical for us to do that. So we do that in the code. Reoccurring row equals A, B in the results row. This is our reoccurring, let's put original data row. So we know that the reoccurring frequency, I've got to define that. That's going to be V of our results row. The reoccurring duration, that's going to be W. That's going to be W. And our scheduled date is AA. So all these values are coming from our results, and our results are located right here. So the frequency, the duration, and the last run, all of those are coming, and the scheduled for, all of that is coming into that. So we just have the three, the frequency, the duration, and the scheduled date in AA. AA is the scheduled for. Okay, so continuing on, now what I need to do is I need to figure out how much we're going to increase the next day. If it's five days, we're going to add 5. What if it's 5 weeks? Or what if, we have a lot of options here, right? We have a lot of options. We have, if we look in the import and summary and go down here to the frequency, we have days, weeks, months, quarters, and years. Days, weeks, months, quarters, and years. So I've got to basically use a formula, some way to update the date based on all of these 5 different variables. Well, how can I do that? Well, Excel has a great feature in VBA called DateAdd. And what it is it's called DateAdd, and it's got a few different parameters. The first one is called interval, so we know the interval. The next one is the number and the date. So for example, if we're trying to add 2 years, we would use something like DateAdd, this is in VBA, and then we would use YYY, 4 Ys, and then how many years? 2 years. And then what is the current, like let's just say the current date, whatever date we're currently on, like 2 years from the current date, 9/4/2019. So this DateAdd right here, this formula would give us, the result of this would be 2 years from the current date, this formula here in VBA. So we can use this, but we're not going to use them all, because we're going to use year, we're going to use quarter, month, we're going to use day, and we're going to use week. That's about all. We're not using these, but I wanted to show you the full table so you get the idea. It accepts all these different parameters, called DateAdd. It's really, really great feature. And so all we need to do really is figure out what the user has selected and assign that. So if they have selected year, we need to assign YYY. If they have selected quarter, we need to assign Q, month M, day D, and week WW. So those are the 5 parameters. So all I need to do is put this or this or this or this into a variable, a string variable, and then we can add that in because we already know the frequency, we've got that, and we already know the date. So we can do that in VBA, and let's show you how we do that. We're going to use select case because we have 5 different options. We've already defined all of our frequencies. Now we're going to use select case. Recurring durations in W. That's what we're going to use to start out with here in our results. All the way over here in W, this is what we're going to be focused on, days. So this could be days, weeks, months, years, quarters. So this is the one. I want to pull this, and then I want to basically, instead of days, I want to assign, what do I want to assign? I want to assign D. So we use select case for that. So if the case is days, then the date interval is D. If the case is weeks, the date interval is WW. Months, M, quarters, Q, and year YY. So this puts all the correct variables into the variable date interval. Then all I need to do is plug in this date interval into the formula, the DateAdd formula. But I do want to check in case the recurring date, let's say for example, let me give you an example of something that we want to prevent. Let's say you're going to have a run it every day. Let's say you want to run this every day, this import, and the last import you did was 10 days ago. I don't want to update the next run to 9 days ago. Do you understand? Because it's going to run then every day up until 9 days. I want to say if the last run was 10 days ago, I want to make the next run tomorrow, assuming that this is 1 day, right? I want to make the next run. I don't want to make it the 1 day after that. So what I want to find out is if the current date, if the last run date is less than the current date, then make it the current date, then the current date. But if it's after that, so in other words, I want to make sure that this next run date is after the current date. That's all I'm trying to do. I want to make sure that the next run date is after the current date. Let me explain that to you again. Let's say we're running it, we want to run it every day, but the user went on vacation and they didn't run it for 10 days. They come back and the last run date is 10 days ago. So then it's going to update, but then it's going to update to 9 days ago, and then it's going to run again. Then it's going to update to 8 days and run again. I want to prevent that. So I don't want it to run 10 times. I only want it to run once for all the previous days, and then the next run would be 1 day after that. So that is what we would do to prevent that. All right. So we used a little bit of an if-then loop to figure that out. If the DateAdd, in other words, if the results of this, the date interval, the recurring frequency, and the schedule date, that's just what the formula I went over with you. Remember correctly? That's just this formula right here. DateAdd, the YYY, 2 and 94. So that is the formula here. If this is less than now, less than the current date time, then what I want to use, then the date that I want to use is the now date. I want to use that now date. So in other words, the day, if we have it scheduled every 1 day, this would be D, this would be 1, and this would be now. So it's going to schedule for 1 day after the current date, 1 day after the current date, assuming that our intervals are days and our recurring is 1, it would schedule 1 day after it. Otherwise, if it's not less than now, then do it based on the scheduled date, which would be probably the current date or maybe 1 day before. But then, so now let's say you wanted it run, every 10 days, but you forgot and yesterday was the day. It'll do it 10 days from yesterday. In other words, 10 days from yesterday. So that's just the way we can do it. So the next date is either 1 day after the current date in this case, or 1 day after the scheduled date. So moving on, now we can add in our information. So H and the reoccurring row, now I want to update our original data. I want to update our data in the reoccurring. I want to update H and I want to update G. I want to update G to last run and I want to update the next run. These two have to be, well, G of course is now, it's the current date and time. H is the date value that we just calculated using this formula. Next date is what's going to go into H. And I just want the date, I want the integer, I don't want the time because the time is tracked in another field. So I'm going to take the decimals out of this in case there are decimals. I want to remove the decimals. I want the whole number, which is going to leave me with just the date only and not the time. I showed you that previously. So H is going to equal, remember this is the recurring row. This is the recurring row. This is the actual data. So that's going to get what our next date is. And then G, I want to track when exactly was the last, add in the current date and time on the last, that doesn't make current date and time, last run, not right. So we're going to add the current date and time on the last run so we know when our reoccurring was run. So G contains that. And it's going to loop through this for every single result. So for the results row, we're going to run this loop, and assuming that there's more than one loop, we're going to run it through each one. And that's it. That's pretty much it. That's how we run it through that. And of course, if there was no data, we would just have an E47 font. Okay, great. So now we've run, now we know how to run our reoccurring. It's going to run it for as many as possible. And what I want to do is when any type of run, whether it's reoccurring or whether it's manual, I want to put it into this log. Manual or reoccurring, I want to get it here into this log. I want to know, we just saw this. So that's with a macro. So we run the macro. And I showed you, but let me just show you again. Anytime we're going to run the dynamic macro or a static macro, we are going to run now a new macro called add to import log. Add to import log. That's both for the dynamic macros and for the static macros. So the static has the same thing to add to import log. And basically what I want to do, it's relatively simple. I want to find the first available row, and then I want to add some information. I want to add the import date and time. I want to add what type it was, if it was a reoccurring or manual. I want to add the template number, and then I want to add the template name, the source type, the destination, and the result. We just went over that. So we're going to find the first available row, and we can use end xlf to do that. So let's get into the macro and see how we create that log. Into the import log macro, we have a module here called import log macro, and it's just one simple macro. And we're focused primarily on sheet 4. Sheet 4 is our log sheet, and that's a new sheet. We're going to define the log row as long. That's the row that we're going to be adding all the information. And simply this is a relatively, the log row equals dot range. We're going to use the first column that's required. And xlf, this will get us the last row, and this will add one to that last row. That gives us our first available row. Range A, of course, now I want the current date and time. We're going to put when that import run. Current date and time is equal to now. B, I'm going to set this to manual automatically. Why are we setting it to manual? It could be reoccurring, because if it's reoccurring, it's automatically going to be set in our reoccurring. Remember this line of code right here? Reoccurring check. Remember this line right here? See this line here? This line sets it, changes it to reoccurring after we run the import and after the log. So remember, the import's already been run. The log has already been created. In this case, the log is automatically set to manual. Everyone's manual, except it's going to change it. It's going to change it to reoccurring, because this is a reoccurring check. So assuming it's been run, it's going to set it. And what we're going to do is we're just going to find the last row with the value, not the first available row, because we've just created it. This macro just created a log. This macro just created. So we know that we can use the last row with the value. So B in the last row, we're going to update. We're going to reset the import to reoccurring. So after it's added, we're going to change it. So it's already manual, and then it changes it to reoccurring because it's actually reoccurring. So that's why we have this line of code here separately, because this is part of reoccurring. Okay, back into the log macro. So we know that first B gets set to manually, then it gets updated to reoccurring, but only if it was a reoccurring type of import. Okay, next up, I want the template number. That's found in N3 of sheet 1. You know that already. The template name is in F2 in sheet 1. You also know that. Then I want to do is I want to check, is it static or dynamic? And a static or dynamic, the source, if you remember correctly, I'd like to know here what kind of a source. The source could be dynamic source, or it could be a static source. So we have that setting here into B2. If B2 is false, it is going to be a static source. If B2 is true, it's going to be a dynamic source. So we use B2 to automatically set that. I'm going to reload this so that everything loads back in. So B2 is going to tell us, so we can determine based on the B2 value. So if sheet 1 B2 equals false, in that case it would be a static. So then the E and the log row equals static. Else it would be dynamic. Else E and the log row equals dynamic. So that's just based on the B2 value. So that's how we get either a static or a dynamic source in our log, static or dynamic here. Next up, we want the destination workbook, so we can do that. That is located in B57 is the destination file name. That is something new that I just added. So we're going to put the destination file name into B57. So that just helps us. That tracks in the import summary. If we take a look, we just added this. I added the destination here, test destination name. I want the workbook name to go here. I want to know that workbook. So I just track it. When we're running an import, we're going to put that destination in B57, and then it's automatically tracked. So for every time the imports run, the destination workbook name is put here in B57. I added that in because I want to track that. So when we have the import static, we see B57 equals the destination workbook name. I want to set that destination workbook name for the import log. So I've put that there, and that runs every time. It's both for dynamic as well. Dynamic has the same thing as well. Okay, continuing on. So B57 contains our file name, and then G of our last one is the import result. That's in sheet 1 E47. Our result of that import is going to go there. If we've got a lot of imports that we're running at the same time, this cell is always going to hold it. This cell is going to hold whatever import that ran. And so if there's a lot, you wouldn't see what ran, but having the import log gives us a really great idea of everything that ran. So we've got all the results and they're recorded, so we know what ran when and what came in. So it's really a log in this case is really important because we want to track what we've been doing. If we have our staff or admin or some people that are helping us, we want to know what they've been doing, and if they can, you can just have them send you the log so we know everything that went in on the import. Okay, great. So we know how to create the log. That's the last end of the macro. It's relatively simple. And now, can you imagine, we didn't use data mapping here because the information came from all over. But can you imagine if we had something like recurring or something like import templates with all of these columns? If we don't use data mapping, do you realize how many lines of code that we would have to do? It would look something like this, but times 10. It would be huge. You know, there's like 30 different, there would be 30 different rows. Without the data mapping, it would look something like this. So keep that in mind. That's why we use data mapping, to reduce a lot of the code. All right, the last thing up, what I really want to do is now I want to run this whole thing, this recurring imports, this recurring check right here. This one I want to run, but I want to run it automatically. When the workbook opens, I want to check it out. So to do that, it's relatively simple. This workbook, we just run this macro right on open if the workbook's open. And now, of course, I promised you from the beginning, how do I get this to run even while I'm on vacation or even while I'm asleep? Well, we can use the task manager for that. That's a Windows file, and what that's going to do, that is a Windows system setting, and that allows us to run programs on scheduled intervals, and that's called the task scheduler, the Windows task scheduler, and it can be found in your Windows file or your menu under Windows systems, and it basically looks like something like this. This is our task scheduler, and what I want to do is I want to open this workbook at intervals. Maybe I want it every week or every day or every month, but we can do that. So all we need to do is open the workbook because we have that macro already assigned on. I'm going to comment this out. I don't want this running when you open it, but basically this will run when you want it to run automatically. You uncomment this out and that'll be just fine, but we don't want macros really running on workbook open unless we know exactly what they are, because it can create issues if you don't know. So I'm going to comment this out, but make sure that when you're ready, you just take the comment. So that's good, the reoccurring check. But how do we get the workbook to open automatically while we're away? Well, we use the task scheduler for that, and that's this. So when you have Windows, and for Mac it's slightly different, but I believe Mac does have an application to do that you can run. And all we would want to do is create a new task in this. So to do that, we would just click on the create a task here, and that's going to, you can call it import task, import schedule task. Give it a name, and what we want to do is we have some options. We can run only when the user's logged in or run when the user's logged in or not. So we have a few different options depending upon how your system is set up. We have a trigger. What do we want to trigger? Well, I want this scheduled on a trigger on a specific date. We have lots of different types of triggers. Maybe I want it every day starting in this and starting at, let's say, at 5:25 or 5:26 p.m. I want to run it every day at that. And what do I want to do? Well, I want to actually launch a program. So I'm going to create new. What do I want to do? I want to start a program. Well, what program do I want to start? I want to browse for a file. I had some issues with an underscore. Files that contain an underscore created a problem, so keep that in mind. I've got another file here, so it's no problem. Import manager. This is our test. Remember, there was an issue when I had an underscore. The name was not being recognized. So I'm going to click that. Now we're hitting OK, and we click OK. So all I'm going to do is start that program, click OK, and now we're ready to go. And so all we need to do is the file that I have open now is called Import Manager Part 10, so it's a separate file, so it would run separately, so not to worry about that. So now all I need to do is wait for that specific time, or you could just run it and test it. And when you click Run, it's going to open it up automatically. This is 365. So there we go, and you'll notice a different version of Excel open because I have both, but I prefer to use 2010. And you can see that this file opened just fine based on the task scheduler. So it worked really great. I just ran it. It'll run automatically if we allow it to. So that's a really handy feature using the task scheduler. And if you don't want it, you just delete any reoccurring and then automatically delete. So that's a great way to set things on automatic. So we can set it on automatic. All right, great. So we have covered in this the ability to check and automatically import reoccurring transactions on the workbook open. We have also shown you how to create an import log and add the information data to the first available row. We have run through the reoccurring imports, how to create fixed criteria and how to get the results of that and bring those results and run macros based on the results and then update the original data using the row. So we've covered a lot in this series. Let me know what you think in the comments. I do appreciate all of your support. It's been a great series. We'll probably do something with inventory next time. So we'll focus on that or anything else that you want. Please let me know in the suggestions if there's something you want to see. I'll try to get to it. Thanks so much for joining us and have a great day.